Welcome everyone, Kostaltyn here with my Legendary Lord rankings for Total War Warhammer 3 as things stand right now. Basically the launch Legendary Lord rankings for the game. Which are the best, which are the worst to play, and they're not the ones that Creative Assembly recommends. Like recommended first campaign as either Kislev or Demons of Chaos. Not necessarily so, believe it or not. They're not really the best to play even initially. And there are some Legendary Lords that are very strong that you might not expect on this list, and some that are pretty weak that you might not believe or weaker than some people might believe. So anyway, I'm going to take it in terms of ranking, so I'm going to be moving around this menu quite a bit. So at an S tier, we have Skarbrand, the Exiles of Khorne, for the Khorne factions. Now, why is Skarbrand S tier? And he is far above everyone else. Well, first off, he does have replenishment in foreign territory. That's a pretty big deal. Since as Skarbrand, you want to start moving and you never want to stop. And that combined with his campaign movement range gain after raising a settlement and campaign movement range benefit for Skarbrand himself after winning a battle means that you are a bulldozer that cannot and should not be stopped. Your map position, and this is a big factor when we're talking about rankings, your map position is also pretty decent. You're not completely isolated. You do have Nakar, you do have Slaanesh to your west, and that is an issue you're going to have to deal with, but you are in pretty solid position. And you're in a strong enough position because of your campaign mechanics that you can be nigh on unstoppable. This is the primary reason Skarbrand is so powerful. The way the difficulty works in this game is that it ramps up in terms of AI bonuses. So the AI gets significantly lower upkeep costs, especially on something like Legendary difficulty. They get unit ranks very quickly on Legendary. They can recruit more units and all that. But all of that takes time. So if you let the AI get about 10 turns ahead of you, you will really feel the pain. But here's the thing with Skarbrand. He can prevent that from happening. He can be so fast because of all the campaign movement range. He can get all his campaign movement range back after winning a siege battle, raising a settlement. He can be so fast that the AI will not get all those benefits, will not really benefit from the difficulty modifiers. Now, he does have a major problem. He is a melee-focused faction in a Total War game. In a Total War games for years, ranged has dominated. It still does in this game. I'd say less so because of all the settlement battles, but even so, being a melee-focused faction with only artillery ranged is going to hurt you quite a bit when you're playing as Skarbrand from a battle perspective. But because you can negate many of the benefits the AI has on a campaign level, it doesn't matter. And you can swarm the enemy with raw numbers, because when you're raising a settlement, a blood host will appear, and a blood host is an extra army that you get for free, and it can be really, really powerful. Now they'll disappear after a while. It's a disposable army, but you can absolutely overwhelm the enemy with raw numbers. This mechanic of gaining extra movement range, of having extra action points, is incredibly powerful. It was powerful with Lebu, it was powerful with Tarox. Is incredibly powerful with Skarbrand, despite all the battle difficulties you're going to face with him. Do expect to have to fight a lot of battles manually, partly because of the auto-resolve, partly because you are going to face rough odds. But if you're pretty solid with battles, there is no better faction than Skarbrand. And in general, on any difficulty, Skarbrand is a bulldozer that cannot be stopped. You can do in a single turn what every other faction would take 10 or even more. That is how insane it is. His roster isn't the greatest, but again, it doesn't matter. He completely negates the difficulty aspect of the game in terms of the campaign, and he can swarm his enemies with raw numbers, with the vast number of armies that you can throw at the enemy. Because not only can he summon armies when he raises a settlement, but those armies can then raise other armies, and on and goes. And now, of course, this will get progressively weaker, but still, it is a very powerful mechanic. So, Skarbrand, S tier, by far, compared to everyone else. Now, in terms of A tier, we have to look at Kislev. And not at Katarin or Kostaltyn, but at Boris. Let me explain. Kislev is an incredibly powerful faction. It has a very solid roster of units, probably one of the strongest roster of units in the game. Has strong magic, not as powerful as Siege, but certainly has better units than Siege. Has hybrid units, has pretty solid faction benefits, be it control, growth, replenishment. But the problem Kislev has with Katarin and Kostaltyn, which drags them down, is the fact that despite their faction benefits and all the wonderful benefits Katarin gets, their map position is really rough. Kislev's territory is difficult to defend. You're going to be facing swarms of enemies from pretty much every direction, and you're going to have major factions coming at you, not just minor ones. You're going to have a host of minor factions coming at you, but you're also going to have major factions as well. And this brings me to Boris. Boris starts much further east, and he's in a considerably better position. Now, there is a drawback with his position that he has territory that has long distances to cover, potentially, if you play it recklessly, as I did when I was playing him on Legendary. But he starts with a very strong army. He starts with warbears. He gains benefits for those warbears. He starts with an artillery unit. That's always a benefit. And Kislev's roster of Kossars is just spamming Kossars as tier 1 units that don't require a building to make is also incredibly powerful. So regardless of how you look at it, Kislev is a strong faction, but what drags Katarin and Kostaltyn down is the fact that they're facing so many enemies and they're surrounded by them and they're going to have so many problems on their hands. Boris does not. He doesn't get the same kind of benefits as Kostaltyn and Katarin does for their rivalry system, but it doesn't matter because he's in such a good position that he's going to benefit from all the other faction benefits that Kislev does have. And that makes Boris an A-tier faction to play. Now, you do have to unlock him. You do have to play as either Katarin and Kostaltyn, get the settlement to level 5, and also hold Prague, Erengrad, and Kislev itself in order to unlock him. And then you have to fight the quest battle, which is pretty easy, actually, to fight to unlock him. But once you unlock him, he is a lot easier, a lot smoother to play than either Katarin or Kostaltyn. I'd say Katarin has significantly higher potential than he does, maybe, but she also has a lot rougher early on, and so her potential might just be limited. Boris just is a steamroller in his own way. Not as powerful as Skarbrand, but still pretty damn sweet. And then as another A-tier faction, we have Tzeentch, Kairos Fate Weaver. Now, Kairos' Fate Weaver, when you're looking at the faction effects from the screen, it doesn't seem that great, does it? It doesn't seem that simple. Oh, battle reinforcement time, enemy reinforcement time prediction, hero action success chance. None of these things really matter as much as you might believe. But Kairos, and I guess Tzeentch factions in general, the way they play is incredibly potent. You can get settlements for free using the book. You can force enemy actions, like you can start revolts, open the gates, do a bunch of nasty things on the campaign using Tzeentch's unique mechanics. You're a very powerful magic user. Like, you look at Kairos, he is the best spellcaster in the game, and you have ranged units as well. Like, you get the Pink Horrors of Tzeentch and then the Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. All very powerful units. The roster that Tzeentch has is probably the best cast roster, and probably one of the better rosters in the game as well. And Kairos, he's a flying spellcaster. Now, the flying part actually matters quite a bit in battles because you can deplete the ammunition of enemies just by moving around. Then they're not going to be able to hit them very easily. They're not going to be able to take them down very easily. And you're just a flying spellcaster, a ranged flying spellcaster. You're going to do a lot of damage with some of the units, some of the heroes, and with Kairos himself. He's a very potent lord from a magical perspective. He can wipe out entire armies on his own. He has the army to back it up. If there's any issue I see with Tzeentch is their replenishment, but the potency of the army and the fact that they have a barrier on their units, a replenishable barrier that's not tied to HP, the fact that they have a barrier on their units that does replenish in battles, that is also very powerful in its own right. But the HP, the replenishment of HP on units, that's, I guess, their weak spot. But otherwise, yeah, Tzeentch is really damn strong. Not as strong as Skarbrand, but significantly better in terms of battles. And overall, like, I would actually recommend Kairos for a lot of people, including new players like Kislev, Kislev, Boris, and all that. They might take some getting used to. Kairos is a lot more straightforward, and that's always a strength. And his starting position here, I mean, he does start at the border with Cathay. Now, it might seem natural to just go for the Bastion and invade for that, but you don't have to. You might want to go south then, or go east, go through the mountains more and deal with the Ogres. Let the minor factions keep Cathay occupied and then invade Cathay from the south. You have flexibility. You're not forced to go down one particular path with Kairos, and that's always great for any faction. So A tier, Boris and Kairos, Fate Weaver. Now, B tier. B tier, it's gotta be Katarin from the very start. She would be higher if not for a couple of factors. Like, when you look at Katarin, she gets higher ranks for her spellcaster. She's pretty crap herself. Like, in terms of battle potential, Katarin is absolutely terrible. Like, her magic is not great, her combat potency is not great. Katarin is a stat stick. That's how you should view her as a legendary lord. She gets a lot of control for her faction. She gets faster training for her mages. She gets higher ranks for her mages. She gets extra devotion. She reduces corruption, and she can field a pretty powerful doom stack with the Ice Guard units, which are pretty strong units. She can field that with 50%, minus 50% upkeep. She's really good in terms of all her benefits. So why isn't she higher? Well, it comes down to positioning on the map and what she has to deal with. So as Katarin, you start off in a pretty central location in some ways, and you're going to be attacked on numerous sides. You start at war, by the way, outside of a minor rebel faction of Norskans that you wipe out in 1-2 turns. Outside of those guys, you start at war with a Kislev Rebellion and Prague, and Prague is a walled city that can be tricky to take. Then you have the Burslings who are to the north. They already have territory in Kislev. They're going to attack you. Then there's Clan Mulder. Then there's the Demon Prince. And then there's all the other issues you have to deal with on the campaign. Ogres, all that kind of stuff. Skaven, potentially vampires, etc. You have a lot of problems, and it can feel like a house on fire playing as Katarin now Legendary. You're trying to put down the fires. You can have stacks of Skaven coming down from Clan Mulder, from Hellpit, descending on Kislev itself while you're trying to deal with other armies. So I would really not recommend Katarin as a first campaign. Unless you're playing on something like easy, then yeah, you can steamroll your enemies and really take advantage of her situation. But on higher difficulties, it's trickier. On top of that, the problem Katarin has, and this is similar to Kostaltyn, the problem she has is the rivalry mechanic she has with Kostaltyn for significant faction benefits that are really worth it. The supporters mechanic. Now here's the thing. The AI cheats, right? So Kostaltyn, if you're playing as Katarin, will just get free supporters. So you have to devote quite a bit of attention to that. And here's the thing. You start a war with a rebellion of Prague. Every time you fight the Kislev faction on the battlefield, it doesn't matter if it's siege or open battle, you're going to lose supporters. And you can make do with some of the invocations from the motherland. You can certainly make do with that. You can handle the situation, but it is a frustrating mechanic. They stole it basically from Paris and Hector, but honestly, I feel Paris and Hector, it's probably not as frustrating in some ways as Paris and Hector, but Paris and Hector was in some ways also more rewarding than what you're dealing with as either Katarin or Kostaltyn. So yeah, Katarin has a great faction, don't get me wrong. Like, in terms of the stats, they're really powerful. But just because of the sheer number of enemies, having to deal with that rivalry, Kostaltyn and all that, because of the starting situation, map position, I have to rate her as B. She's pretty powerful if you can get going, but it's that part of getting going that is the issue that's going to drag her down. Now, in terms of other B tier factions, I'm gonna rate Cathay as B tier as well. They're not bad in any way, shape, or form. They're pretty solid. What's frustrating with Cathay is the harmony mechanic, and it's difficult to maintain a harmonious empire if you're playing as them. It's difficult to balance perfectly yin and yang, and it's very easy to get the negative impact of either going too far in yang or going too far in yin. So that is frustrating. You have benefits with the Bastion, you have benefits with the Great Compass. You do also have constant chaos invasions from the Kurgans. That's frustrating. But they're okay. They're just not as good, though. and from my perspective, as Kislev, with all the powerful units that they have, or all the faction benefits that they have. And look, Kislev is a lot easier to manage. You just get the benefit. With Cathay, you actually have to work for it. And it can feel random, like, oh, you got the character from a quest? There goes your yin-yang balance. In terms of the lords themselves, I'd say Xiao Ming has better benefits, especially the missile infantry unit upkeep benefit and ammunition for missile units, as well as corruption. Whereas Xiao Ming, he probably has a stronger economy because of the fact he has 20% max cargo capacity for caravans. He gets hero ranks for alchemists. The upkeep for Ogre mercenaries is hit and miss, honestly. I don't like Ogre units are strong, but it's kind of hit and miss because you need a relation with an Ogre faction. That's what he's supposed to be all about, but it can be tricky. And he has an upkeep of minus 25% for melee units. I'm guessing in an ideal situation you'd have a lot of Ogre units in his army, but that's difficult to manage. He does get quite a bit of armor for melee units. And look, melee-focused factions are generally going to be weaker than range-focused factions. Skarbrand is the exception. I think they made him that powerful in the campaign because he knew he was going to be crap in battle. So they were trying to make up for that. And funnily enough, Khorne isn't even the strongest melee faction. That actually would be the Ogres. But yeah, I would certainly rate Cathay in general, both of them, as B tier. Then we have the Ogres. Now, you have Greasus and you have Scrag. Now, Scrag and Greasus, both in their own ways, have pretty solid starting positions. Like, Greasus, he's in the Mountains of Morn. He has a bunch of Ogre tribes to deal with, all that. He can raid Cathay caravans for gold. He can expand either northward into Cathay, or he can expand southward or westward, all that. He doesn't have to deal with a swarm of factions like Kislev does. He's in a much better and isolated position. Scrag starts in this corner, in the southwestern corner near the Empire. He can conquer the entire fucking Empire. In fact, many campaigns, if you see many campaigns, it isn't uncommon at all to see Scrag and the Disciples of the Maw holding pretty much the entire southwestern side of the map, where most of the Empire, where the Empire is situated. Because the Empire is really divided and weak. They're not the Order tide in this game yet. Maybe that will change. But right now, given the situation with the Empire, Scrag is really powerful. Like, he can paint the entire Imperial map in his color, or in grease oil, I guess. Cooking oil, I guess, if he wants to. Both of them have their own benefits as well. I would probably say Greasus is better in battle because of the unit mass that he gets, though he is going to have an issue with casters. That's actually a problem, whereas Scrag will have his own casting ability, though I'm never really sold on using my Legendary Lords for casting, because I always feel like I'm losing on essential skills in other departments like campaign or army wise. So I do feel like Scrag is more limited than that, but the campaign movement range on him, the butcher capacity, the casualty replenishment, upkeep for gorgers, like, both are strong in their own way. Probably Grease is better because of the unit mass, 25% unit mass. He also gets a solid income from trade. He has good relations with the Ogre Kingdom as a benefit. He gets income from raiding, Iron Guts, etc. Both are pretty solid. The Ogres are, I feel with the Ogres as a faction in general, I feel the Ogres are probably overall stronger than other factions, like just in sheer battle potential. I feel that they made them somewhat overpowered because they're a DLC faction, so they made them somewhat stronger than other factions because they're going to get less attention long term. So they put in more effort initially because other factions are going to get more love, and some other factions absolutely do need more love than the Ogres do, but the Ogres are in a really solid position at the moment. So yeah, B rating. They just don't compare with what Kairos has, or what Khorne has, or what even Kislev has, if Kislev wasn't facing with a house on fire. But Boris doesn't, so Boris is an A tier, whereas Ogres are B. Okay, moving on. C tier. Kostaltyn. Kostaltyn has to go here. Now, here's the problem. Kostaltyn has all the issues that Katarin has, though he doesn't start at war with Help It, so he doesn't have to deal with the horde of Skaven that are going to descend upon him. So he has that going for him. But here's the thing. His benefits, beyond the base benefits that Kislev gets, and the supporter benefits that he shares with Katarin, though he has to fight for it, of course, his actual faction effects are pretty crap, honestly. Like, yeah, you get more devotion from Patriarch factions, okay. But what else do you get from that? Melee attack and leadership for Kossars? Okay, I'll take the leadership, but the melee attack is absolutely useless because you're not using Kossars as a melee unit, you're using them as a ranged unit. Wound recovery time? I guess the passive ability of Frenzy is okay, but he just doesn't hold a candle compared to the benefits that Katarin has. He's probably better in battle on an individual level than Katarin is, but she's an amazing stat stick for your faction in both campaign and even in battles. He has very little to offer except, the Patriarch buffs. And Patriarchs are great, but they're not great because of their combat potential. They're great because of replenishment, and they're great because of the buffs they give. They're not great. 20% for embedded Patriarchs. What am I guess you could make a Patriarch Doom stack with Kostaltyn and it'll probably be very strong, but outside that, I'm just not seeing him being very strong. Kislev is strong in general, but he also starts over with a lot of factions. He has Norskans to deal with, the Kislev Rebellion to deal with. He has the Demon Prince. He isn't a steamroller when you're playing against him. He might be steamrolled when you are playing as him. That's a different discussion, but yeah, Kostaltyn is probably the worst legendary lord in the game. The only thing that keeps him from being even lower on this list and keeps him at the C rating as opposed to a D rating or even F is the fact that Kislev as itself is a strong faction. That's one advantage he does have for all the issues he has as a faction. Then there's Slaanesh as well, sharing a spot with Kostaltyn as a C rating. Slaanesh is tricky, I'd say. So you have a faction that's focused on diplomacy, that gets benefits in diplomacy, that can seduce entire factions to becoming their vassals. Okay, except diplomacy, although much improved in Warhammer 3, is still total war diplomacy. So you might have factions declaring war against your vassals, even though you might steamroller them, so you get involved in a bunch of pointless wars because of that. So the vassal system, the military alliance system, has a lot of drawbacks to begin with. So that's one problem. And on top of that, if we look at the roster, Nakari's issue is that when you look at the roster, what do you see? You see a bunch of fast units. You don't have ranged. You see a bunch of fast units that don't have durability in melee and are reliant on damage. That will not work very well on Legendary. You can make it work. You can play as any faction and win as any faction, but it will not work on any high difficulty. You will have major issues. Khorne and Nurgle at least have durability in melee for all the problems they might have in terms of battle. Nakari is a glass cannon type faction. He can do a lot of damage, or whatever, can do a lot of damage, and can capture points like no one else can, but you are going to lose units very quickly, and having that low durability is going to hurt you quite a bit. The one advantage Nakari does have is that diplomacy effect, and the fact that as a demon faction you don't actually have to fight the human factions. Like people have said this, that you're a faction that's more focused on fighting other chaos factions than engaging in diplomacy with the human factions. That seems appropriate. You're going to struggle against that, especially on a high difficulty, because of all the melee units. Khorne and Nurgle and all that are going to throw against you. Their melee units are going to eat yours alive. I mean, that's the problem. Nakari might actually do pretty decently against missile-focused factions because he can close the gap. But the factions he's going to fight, or it is going to fight, are factions that have melee units that you have to engage in melee. And you're gonna lose those engagements unless you're really clever. Yeah, you have magic at your disposal, but it's not really the best magic in the world either. So you do have problems. You do have a lot of problems in battle. The one benefit Nakari does have is the position. Starting in a corner is a strong position. It protects you from rival factions. It gives you a good sense of protection. It prevents you from being swarmed as some other factions can be. But yeah, you do have a lot of problems. Nakari does have a lot of problems. So C rating it is. And then D rating, we have Nurgle. Look, Nurgle is a slow-ass faction. Their growth is slow. Their units are slow. And slow melee units in a game like this, yeah, they're durable, but the problem is because of all the of the impact on any higher battle difficulty, you're really gonna feel the pain of that when you're facing against factions that are gonna last longer than you in a battle. Like, I understand what Creative Assembly was trying to do, but it just doesn't work considering the way they handled higher difficulties. Maybe Nurgle isn't that much of a pain to play on normal battle difficulty, but it absolutely would be on a higher difficulty. You do have some decent magic, but on top and plagues, but Nurgle is just slow and tedious, and it's turtle type faction. That might actually work a lot better in Warhammer 3 than you might believe, but you are playing a slow and ponderous faction that takes a lot of time to get going, takes a lot of time to take into territory, takes a lot of time to grow. Units are expensive, buildings are expensive. It's just a painful faction to play, honestly, at this point. And generally, Kugaf and Nurgle in general are listed as the worst faction in the game. So D tier is for Nurgle and Kugaf. And then we have the Demons of Chaos. Now you might wonder, why the hell are the Demons of Chaos on par with Nurgle? Surely they're much better. Yes, they are. Here's the thing. Kugaf has his issues, sure, but he isn't fighting a swarm of enemies from the start. The Demon Prince? He is. That's the problem. Kostaltyn may be a pain to play if you're actually playing him, but he can last quite a bit on any higher difficulty. And if you're playing as the Demon Prince, consider the situation you're going to face. You have Nordland, you have the Wood Elves, you have Norscan factions, and you have Kostaltyn, all of which want to take your head at the same time. He probably has the hardest starting position of any faction in the entire game. And if you're playing this faction on Legendary, you're gonna have a very, very painful situation to deal with. He does have benefits by being able to get such a wide variety of units, like getting the casters from Siege really saves him. If he didn't have the casters from Siege, and if he didn't have the ranged units from Siege, he would be even lower than F tier, really. But he does have that. He does have magic. He does have flexibility, but he's just in such an awful position at war with so many people that all want his head. And expanding creates its own issue, because if you expand, if you take territory, then great, you just met new enemies that are all going to send their stacks against you more and more and more. So you're gonna absolutely be swarmed when you're playing the Demon Prince. This is probably the hardest faction to get going with on Legendary. Kislev has some breathing room compared to what you're dealing with as the Demon Prince. So I would say that far from being a recommended first campaign to play, this is probably the hardest campaign to play in the entire game on anything but easy. Like, yeah, if you're playing on easy, it doesn't matter what you play. You could play Skaven and just use Skaven slaves if you wanted to get by. But on anything beyond that, it's gonna be a rough situation. So both Nurgle and the Demon Prince get a D rating. So to recap, as an S tier, Khorne. As an A tier, you have Kairos and Boris. B tier, Katarin, Cathay, and the Ogres. C tier, Kostaltyn and Slaanesh, N'Kari. And then finally D tier, Nurgle and the Demon Prince. And honestly, I would consider the Demon Prince even lower than Nurgle, even lower than Kugaf for all the issues Nurgle has in battle and campaign. The fact that you have so many enemies, it's not something people it's not something people that play outside that don't play Legendary can understand. But when you're playing on Legendary and you're seeing every single minor faction sending one stack after another against you, like showing up with 1-2 stacks against you, that's going to become a problem real quick. It can have its benefits if you can deal with it, but it is such a painful situation to deal with when you're playing as the Demon Prince. That's all I had to say. Kostaltyn here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more, ladies and gentlemen.